I want to start by reminding us all that this lecture series and the entire STEM communications program is funded from a grant by Burroughs Welcome Fund. So big shout out of a thank you to Burroughs for making this possible today. So to introduce today's speaker, we are thrilled to have Niba from Notes by Niba here to talk with you about promoting your research on social media. Niba is a full-time multimedia science communicator who has built digital communication strategies for such organizations as the Simmons Foundation, Black Women PhD, the Ecological Society of America, and for Stanford. And true story, when I was looking at how to fill this slot and who to ask to come in and give this talk today, I looked at some of Niba's work on the web, and she has several videos. Hopefully you've done some of your homework and researched her a little bit and seen these. But she has wonderful videos, and the one that I first watched was about how artificial intelligence could be used to shop for boots. And I immediately knew that she was truly the person who could make science, who could teach our students to make their technical work and their complex scientific topics relevant and understandable to everyone. So without further ado, I want to welcome you, Niba, and hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Jill, for that introduction. It's always nice hearing nice words about yourself. Hi, everyone. Hello, everyone on the internet. My name is Niba. I'm so excited to be here today and talk to you guys about conveying your research through social media. We have a lot to talk about, so I'll be going kind of fast, but if you miss anything, it's not to worry. The talk will be available and uploaded on my YouTube channel afterwards, and you can watch it at whatever speed you would like. So just off the bat, my pronouns are she, her, hers. In terms of identifiers, I am a queer first-generation woman of color. I am based on unseceded land of the Ohlone peoples, also known as San Francisco, California. I was actually born and raised here in the Bay Area, so I grew up during the time of Silicon Valley. Like high school was right by Facebook headquarters, drove by Instagram headquarters every single day. It was a very interesting time to grow up. In terms of sharing this talk, you can find all of the links that I'll be providing here online. If you have any issues finding them, feel free to message me on Twitter, my website, Instagram, whatever works for you. Just like with a scientific talk, I do ask that you do not share these slides online. You're welcome to tweet things or share things that you like and learn. Just be sure to tag me. My tag is at the bottom of every single one of these. This is a virtual talk for the plague season. As a result, we have virtual problems. If my cats come across the screen, we're going to go ahead and ignore them because they tend to do that. And I would really like to thank you guys so much for showing up right now. I know it's been an incredibly tough week, and being able to go about your life as though politics is not affecting it is really quite a privilege. So I really, really want to thank you for showing up. We all know that science doesn't exist in a bubble, so it's my hope that by coming to this talk that maybe you guys will walk away with a little bit more energy, hopefully learn something, or at the very least just appreciate the memes, because those are always a little bit better. So I want to start off with something fun, some examples of SciComm that I've really enjoyed. So these are just a handful of random science memes that I really enjoy, as well as a TikTok about a vintage microscope by my good friend Alex Danis. If this audio doesn't show, let me know.
It's a little antique field microscope, and it uses a mirror as its light source, and you focus it by moving the eyepiece up and down. And I don't really know much about it. It didn't come with a lot of information, but you put the slide in and you look down from the top and there's a fruit fly butt.
So I just think that one is just a really great example of taking something that's really scientific and having something interesting, and then the end just having something really cute, just a flute fly butt. This is one of my all-time favorite memes, me watching my agarose heat up in the microwave. I love this one so much because it's very niche to science, and everyone can relate to that like moment of staring at the microwave and like praying that your agarose doesn't boil over and explode everywhere. I also want to point out this really awesome set of just amazing science communication through social media. This is my friend Sally Waring, who's based in the UK. She started off just kind of going to different ponds and just categorizing and filming all the different single-celled organisms that are living there. So she started off just kind of doing this by herself as like a fun side project, and eventually it grew and grew. And eventually she was offered to do a little web series creating a bunch of videos about these different organisms. So the video that you guys are seeing here today is actually a little snippet from one of those videos. And this is really just a way of showing you guys that social media can result in a wide variety of things, even if at the beginning it may seem like you might not be getting anywhere specifically. So that's enough about me. I want to know a little bit about how you guys are doing today. So we'll be using this Google Jamboard, and this is the link. It's tiny URL, Niba, and then the date of year, month, and then day. If you have any issues with accessing it or you need to revisit it, Jill will be posting the link shortly. So I think every talk usually starts off with like some concept of like, this was my path to get to this point. I've always thought of a path as just being really unrealistic, because there's always this like classic diagram of success is not this like one line, it like goes up and down. But even that just seems so unrealistic to me, because most people don't have like a straight linear, like from point A to point B. It implies that there's this like direction and that there's always going to be this one direction and there's just occasional setbacks. And I think that is just not true. We all know that people will change careers quite often. And sometimes a lot of science communicators in particular have come from a wide variety of careers and have made these shifts. But just because you make a career shift doesn't mean that all your previous knowledge is now invalid. So I think of it rather as a garden. So say here you are this little like garden bed, and you have these different interests. For me, when I was really little, I was really interested in science and watching videos just like every other kid. And then as time went on, my interest grew. I started getting really interested in beauty and fashion. When I was in college, it was expensive, as many of you know. So I started off waitressing, and then I got a job in modeling. I say this really to kind of illustrate that I needed something and I explored all the ways to get there. So if you're interested in perhaps doing outreach, but because of current situations, you may not be able to do so, think of the different ways that you may be able to still continue to do that outreach, perhaps doing a virtual science engagement group and ways to kind of achieve those goals despite whatever may be going on. So while I was working in this field, I started creating all kinds of cool stuff. So as a result, I started getting more in tune with the social media side of things and content creation side of things. And you can create stuff, but if you want it to grow, generally you have to kind of do it strategically. Occasionally something might just go viral and you may be lucky, but this is where a lot of the strategy started playing in. So I'm excited to share with you guys a lot of the stuff that I've been learning about that since then. So meanwhile, in college, I spent all 4 years researching plants in the Brady Lab of Plant Genetics. One thing I want to really quickly emphasize, I did not think that plants were cool before I started working in this lab. And I was on like team, like, I don't know, immunology or like curing cancer or something like that, like really intense. And then I like tried this out and was like, whoa, this is amazing. I want to do this forever. So I know you are all really busy, but if you do have the chance to ever try something new and you know you won't hate it, just give it a shot, because you never know where you're going to end up. And for me, I ended up going to grad school. I actually went to Duke, which was just down the road from you guys, and I ended up continuing to research plants in the Benfey lab. And while I was in grad school, I learned what science communication was. And I realized that given how my garden, so to speak, was growing, this is really what I wanted to do, because it blended all my interests together. And so I restarted my entire social media from scratch and started talking science instead. And at first, I took a lot of inspiration from scientists who were already on social media and posting photos of myself in lab, doing lab stuff, that kind of thing. And while this was really fun, I realized that this would just fizzle out the second that I left lab. And if I wanted to be a science communicator, I needed something a little more sustainable. I also was getting really interested in video and more content creation. So I decided I wanted to reach an audience that was outside of science. And to do that, I would talk about something that I knew that those people would find interesting and I found interesting, and bring the science to that topic, which is beauty and fashion. So I also decided I didn't want to just do photos. I wanted to learn videos as well. And this was so painful. This is an example of what one of my first videos looked like. After 6 weeks of editing, each one of these little blocks represents like one little video clip. And a couple months after that, this is what my videos started looking like afterwards. And honestly, that is the hardest part, is creating something that is not quite great and not perfect, but then doing it again and again and again until you get to the level that you want. I'm sure you all have lots of experience optimizing experiments. It's kind of similar to think about it in the same exact way. So after I finished grad school at Duke, I was able to leap directly into SciComm because I had been doing so much of it while at Duke. So I worked for Stanford for a little while, making some videos for them, and then I got a science video fellowship. And now I am a more than full-time freelancer, creating like websites for Black women PhDs, working with Science Sandbox, creating social media. If anyone here is considering a career in science communication, I strongly suggest doing an internship. I have links to a whole bunch of internships on my website under resources for science communicators. I encourage you to check those out. Even if you're not interested in doing a career, there's even internships that are like, a couple months, perhaps you need a little break. Highly suggest getting one. But anyways, your garden will keep growing and changing. It's not like it ever ends at some point. And like I said, people can change their careers at any given point. So think about it as you're this collection of passions and experiences and knowledge. And that collection goes between different areas, and you're changing and impacting those areas with that whole collection. And it's really important to kind of plan for this change, because the digital landscape is constantly changing. This here is a little GIF of a snippet of a video that talks about it graphs the past 16 years or so of social media and shows how things have really changed. If you have some time, I highly recommend watching this video at like twice speed or something like that, because it can really show you numbers wise and give you a sense of how many people are on social media and what platforms are there, and just how strong some of these platforms have remained. For example, YouTube has remained the #1 video platform for so many years, despite many other video platforms coming in and joining. So I'm going to start off with 3 common mistakes that I see pretty often on social media. This isn't limited just to scientists, but just anyone who is trying to grow their social media presence, digital presence in general. The first one is just kind of assuming that the algorithm is going to magically lift your content. Yes, this definitely sometimes happens. Things can go viral, stuff can just magically go. I see a lot of channels, though, that just continue to post without really thinking about how their content will work with the algorithms or work with their audience. And sometimes I'll come across like a really amazing creator who has just like really cool stuff, but they just have very little engagement. And it's because of this lack of strategy or lack of consistent posting. And so it's really important to kind of not just create, but also think about how you're creating and why you're creating. The second thing I see often is undervaluing branding. If you are hashtagging, retweeting, liking things, that's great, that's amazing. But at the end of the day, you want people to come to your page and see what you have to offer and then enjoy it. So that really comes with branding yourself well, making sure your vibe is really present, making sure people can instantly understand what's on your page. And we'll get into a little bit of how to do that later. And the last thing is not encouraging real engagement. One of the easiest ways to really check this is if you are posting something and the only thing you have to respond to people's comments is just like, thank you, then that might not quite be the right thing. So say, for example, you make a joke, and how can people respond to this joke other than just being like, oh, ha ha ha, or like lols or whatever? Is it like a relatable joke? Can they relate to that? Is there a way that you can perhaps phrase the joke as like, here's the joke, is there anyone else who's had a similar experience? And encourage that conversation at the end of that tweet or post or whatever you're using. So this brings me to kind of like the elephant in the room. I don't think it would be a social media talk if I didn't talk about the downsides of social media. It's been proven time and time again that social media can be very negative. It's very addicting. There's no privacy. It's easy to get caught up in this like comparison game. There was recently a Netflix documentary called The Social Dilemma. It's actually a docudrama because there's portions of it that are dramatized and it kind of follows this various families. But anyway, this documentary kind of talks about these different issues, but it does kind of miss a lot of points. For example, it comes from a mostly white cast, and it doesn't address the opinions or get any feedback from BIPOC, which are a huge proportion of people negatively affected by social media. It also it kind of interviews all these like inventors of social media, like the person who created the like button on Facebook, instead of looking at sociologists who are actually studying ways to fix this. So anyways, just with life, there's a balance between the negative and the positive. I strongly suggest this book, How to Do Nothing. One of the points that the author brings up is kind of like this balance between enjoying content creation and content consumption, but also not feeling like you are trapped, not being trapped in that like endless scrolling. One of the things she brings up is that sometimes people will do a digital detox to kind of like get rid of those feelings. But if you have like real underlying issues, that's not going to be enough. So anyway, super strongly suggest this book. And now onto kind of the pros of being online. So you want to balance sharing your work without annoying people. So you do this by kind of humanizing yourself. Really, people want to talk to a human. They don't want to talk to a robot. So the pros of being online, especially for science, is really about promoting your work. There's evidence that papers that are on social media and get more traction on there are cited more. It's also helpful for promoting yourself. You can get perhaps new jobs, new opportunities, network with other scientists. And on top of that, all these people that you're meeting, you can get advice and feedback from. If you're stuck on a particular situation, stuck on a particular experiment, trying to find some literature, all of these ways are ways you can meet people that you might not meet through other means in real life, especially right now during the pandemic. And then lastly, you can teach others. You can reach an audience that you can't otherwise reach. And to do all of this in real time is incredibly strong. Part of the like COVID response was just the ability to be reaching people so quickly in real time, a lot of it through social media. So I'm going to start out with some points to keep in mind for all of communication, not just for like SciComm. Not to beat the dead horse one more time, but I'm going to beat it one more time because it's really important. You want to build a story. This is so important. Anytime you're trying to say something, it's so much easier because humans remember stories. So for science, the stories can they all follow this general pathway. But for science, sometimes in papers, we kind of phrase it as like, here's the problem, the biological question or whatever question that we're trying to answer. And then here's the way we did it. And that's the end. But rather, if you think of stories in other ways, the problem is perhaps the societal need that we're trying to address, or perhaps you were really stressed trying to get this experiment done in time, like rushing to the conference. How were you going to make it in time? The rising action could be something of, you're doing this experiment. Oh my gosh, you ran out of the materials last minute and you have a presentation the next week. What are you going to do? So thinking about how you're going to frame this story is really important. And deciding how you're going to frame this story is beginning with the end in mind. So if you want to do something perhaps about encouraging people from marginalized backgrounds to enter science or perhaps look at your story, in that case, the resolution may be something along the lines of your journey into science if you are from said marginalized background, talking about the issues that you faced along the way and that kind of thing. So just kind of thinking about the framework of what exactly you're trying to come across will frame the rest of your story. As usual, you want to be simple, not have a bunch of jargon. Within my website, I have a link to a tool called the dejargonizer. It just kind of recognizes any words that you copy paste in there as being jargon. As scientists, I think we sometimes kind of fall into this pattern of like, whoops, just accidentally used like transcription factor and expected people to know what that is. So if you have like little bios or words, I encourage you to like copy paste in there. Just have like a little check of like, is this really a word that the general public and like everyone will be able to know? And then the last 2 points are just to not be condescending. Don't act as this person that like magically has this knowledge that the other person doesn't. That's just like fundamentally untrue. You're two people, each with different sets of knowledges. You just happen to know something the other person doesn't. You're not trying to simplify the science. You're just trying to communicate it in a way that the other person can understand. And then for digital communication, it's really easy to think of the internet as just like this massive black hole where millions of people exist. But unless you're a Kardashian, like people are just not going to not everyone's going to follow you. You don't want to talk to everyone. You want to talk to the people who are interested in what you have to say and the people who you are trying to reach. You want to reach a very specific audience. But the key to that high engagement, especially for science, is understanding that you want to reach the audience and build your community. So if you want to reach scientists, understand that you are part of the scientific community. So when you are responding to other people's social media, that is just as important as creating your own. So if you don't remember anything else from what I say in this talk, just remember this. It is all about your community. But how do you figure out what they are? This here is a figure from a paper published 2 years ago. It kind of shows the two main methods that a lot of scientists communicate, especially online. On the left-hand side, we have what is known as inReach, where scientists talk to other scientists and they talk to people who will be applying their science. And then they also have outreach, for example, science journalism, talking in museums, etc. It's a really great, this figure is just a really great representation of how research is communicated. But I want to point out one thing, which is that inReach is just as valid. If you are trying to do things like network or find job opportunities, you want to be talking to other scientists. Both types of social media use are completely valid and useful, but in thinking about what exactly you want to do, that will help inform which of these audiences you're trying to reach. So for social media and many communications, this is kind of the general strategy. So in the beginning, you'll have to set your objective. Do you want to perhaps change a behavior, like get people to wash their hands? Do you want to promote a new research finding? Do you want to network with others at a conference? Strategy covers things like your platform, your target audience, your timing of your post, and then content goes into like text, audio, video, photo, length. If something is really short, perhaps it can live on Twitter rather than an entire blog, that kind of stuff. And then finally, this is so important, is your feedback. What is your insights? What are people saying? What are people DMing you about? This can't be like, it's a little sometimes overlooked in social media because so much of it focuses around content, but I really want to emphasize these are cyclical things that all interplay with each other. So in getting started, just a series of ideas. Step one is follow. You want to follow journals, magazines, articles, that kind of thing, but you also want to follow institutions, agencies. If you're interested in following scientists, you should follow not just professors and that kind of thing. You want to follow people who are students, people who are leaders, people who are at nonprofits, scientists at research institutions. Hashtags, SciComm, academic chatter, science Twitter, PhD chat, and hashtags for conferences and for your specific field is also really useful. One of the biggest questions I get a lot is how do you balance between posting science and your personal content? Because you're trying to talk about your science, but at the same time, you don't want to seem like this textbook that's now in social media form. So this is kind of easier to do if you're like studying rhinos somewhere and you can just like take selfies with the rhino or whatever. But you can also do this with bench science, you know, taking selfies in lab, photos of equipment, etc. But ultimately, if you're interested in building your presence online, think about how your content will evolve as time goes on. So if you build a brand entirely based on like lab photos and at some point you're not in lab, then what happens? So think about what you want your brand to be like, and we'll get to that in a second. Next is to set a goal. This relates back to what I was saying before, all those different reasons to use social media, but if you can pick a goal, that'll help you figure out how you want to like pick these platforms, how you want to be using them, how often you want to use them. Do you want to engage with others in the field? Do you want to communicate science to the public? Do you want to inspire others? Do you want to tell your own story? Those kinds of things. Next, this one is it's just so undervalued and so understated. There's no way for me to like bold this and caption and capitalize this enough, is just keep doing. It's so easy to get burnt out. It's so easy to like worry about the numbers, the followers, the metrics. Social media has been around for like a while now, so there's definitely people who have been using it and are really successful, but especially at the beginning, you don't want to get burnt out. You don't want to fall into that like pit of comparing yourself. Just keep doing it, especially for that like first 10K on like any platform other than TikTok. It just keep doing and focus on, are you creating the content you want for the audience that you're intending to reach? And then lastly, you know, you can attend all the webinars in the world, you can attend all the workshops in the world, but at the end of the day, I'll give you all these cool tips and formulas and like cool like algorithm things, but it's all about your authenticity. You don't want to present someone who's not yourself, because one, that's impossible to maintain, and two, you're going to attract the wrong type of community. You want people who like genuinely like you and your science, and that way they'll listen to whatever it is you have to say a bit more. So just remember, authenticity above formula, above all else. So platforms. These are the general platforms. There's like the obvious, you know, Facebook, Twitter, but I want you to look at some of the other platforms as well. Pinterest is really important. LinkedIn is really important. Pinterest, for example, really loves infographics, motivational stuff. Scientific art is a really big one. House experiments with kids is a really huge one. There's things about painting with magnets, different ways you can incorporate science things into there. So if you're running perhaps a event or a blog, you can try and migrate it over to Pinterest. Make sure you cross-pollinate, meaning you do it across multiple platforms to try and bring in more people from these other platforms to your place. And then LinkedIn is also really great if you want to get into perhaps entrepreneurship or science talks or science policy. Within academia, it's not really used very much, but I highly recommend sprucing up your LinkedIn. Many people and jobs and opportunities can approach you through this if you have it well set up. This is Justin Shafir, also known as Mr. Fascinate. He is a wonderful speaker, gives many, many talks, and he has said that like one of the reasons that he gets invited to many talks is because in his very key like byline right there, you can see keynote speaker. And so people see that and immediately understand that's one of the things he does. And so if they're looking for a speaker for an event, they can immediately go to see him. So how do you pick which platform to use? So like I said, cross-platform pollination is what it's called. When you're announcing events, perhaps announcing a new research paper or that you graduated, that's really huge. You want to post the information in different platforms, but the formula or the way that you post this information is probably not going to be the same across all these platforms. It's going to depend on your goal. Do you want to, educate, chat, connect, etc.? But it also depends on the audience on that platform. So this here is a figure. It's a little bit outdated now. It's been like 6 years, and that's a long time in social media years. But it polled a bunch of scientists to see what exactly they do on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and some other platforms that are not relevant to this talk. But for this one, you can see that overall Twitter, everyone agreed, is really great for conferences, for real-time engagement. And then you can see LinkedIn is really helpful for job hunting and networking. And LinkedIn pretty much just replaced Facebook, and Facebook has fallen out of professional use. So if you're thinking about making like a very professional Facebook page, maybe evaluate, is your audience looking at Facebook professionally? Is that really the best place to put that? Next thing to think about when you're picking your platform is your vibe, really, so to speak. And by this, I mean, like, what is your style? Do you want to do science comedy? Do you want to create movies? Do you want to write? Do you want to debate with other scientists? Depending on this, your vibe will kind of change. And so just really play to your strengths. If you are not interested in, writing, there's no reason to force yourself to do it. There's plenty of other ways to communicate that don't require you to step out of your comfort zone or perhaps do something that you don't want to do. And then last, but certainly not least, but sometimes over pushed, is consider the content that you are making. If it's short, can it go into a tweet? If it's a photo, would it live better on Instagram rather than on Twitter? Oftentimes, I think people think about the content first, and then they think about all these other points later. So just be careful to think about everything all together when you're debating which platform to go into. In the beginning, it can be really tempting to just launch full in and go into every single platform. I really suggest trying to pick one, maybe two platforms just to begin with and kind of dip your toes in first before going onto a whole spread of different platforms. But speaking of a whole host of different platforms, this is Emily Space Gal, our first kind of example, so to speak. She has platforms across Instagram, across Twitter, across Reddit, etc. And for this one, we are going to look at can you see my mouse? Yeah, okay. So this one, we're going to kind of look at that cycle that I was telling you about earlier, her objective. So if she has all these different platforms, why would she use Reddit? So recently she produced and hosted a show called Emily's Wonder Lab. And as part of the kind of promotion for this show, she wanted to talk to people who might be interested in the show, people who might have kids who are interested in the show, and that kind of thing. So she decided to do a Reddit AMA, Ask Me Anything, because Reddit specifically is really great for that long form engagement. If you want people to be able to type out entire paragraphs to you, if you want people who can ask you really in-depth questions, perhaps link to other things, that's where you would like to go. You can do a lot of talking and engagement across other platforms like Twitter and whatnot, but if you're typing out entire paragraphs, Twitter has that character limit, Instagram has kind of a photo-based option. So that's how you would pick this platform instead. So moving on to strategy. For this one, I want to focus a lot on your branding, your aesthetic, your vibe. One of the beginning questions that always pops up is, how do you figure out what exactly this will even be? So it's 5 steps really. For the beginning, you just want to kind of reframe your mind. Think about what would you do if you had infinity resources? If you already had your full platform, you were already confident, you didn't have any doubts, fears, how would you approach your work and how would your online presence look? And if you can think about what that would look like, then you may not have those resources, but approaching it from that mindset will help so much, so much. Next, you want to plan your brand identity. This really means like, what do you want to be known for? If you have like a couple adjectives, what adjectives do you want people to describe your work for, your content with, and maybe like when the plague is over, what adjectives would they describe you in real life? And so with these adjectives, you want to identify what makes you different. Do you have an opinion on something in your field? Do you have a stance that is different from other people? Are you part of a group that hasn't been traditionally represented in science? What exactly makes you stand out? And then you want to be able to kind of figure out the purpose of what you're creating. Are you trying to motivate, inspire, educate, etc.? Depending on these, your aesthetic, your look, all of these things that kind of form your online person, so to speak, will change. And then lastly is engaging. So as you talk to your audience, they'll say things like, oh, that's so relatable, or they'll say things like, oh, the same thing happened to me, or oh, I love this particular part. And so as they're saying that, that's really key information, because you're figuring out what exactly that you are putting out there that your audience is resonating with. And that is so key. So that's why when you go on like Instagram, you always see creators being like, comment, let me know what you think, let me know what you think, because they're trying to figure out, you know, what are they putting out there that their audience likes to see. And so a couple quick points on this. Don't worry about your brand look changing. It's important is that it exists. It just needs to exist. In the beginning, it'll certainly change a lot, and it'll definitely change over time. But first impressions just really matter. You only have a couple seconds to capture someone the moment that they land on your page. So what that means is they need to be able to quickly understand exactly what you are about, exactly what kind of content you deliver, exactly what kind of things you stand for within those few seconds. So how do you do this? So you have some searchable keywords. Your profile is generally like, you know, your profile photo, your banner, maybe like a website, maybe like a pinned tweet, whatever. You have these like key things that are in your homepage, so to speak. So if you can add in searchable keywords into those phrases, that's really key. So don't put something like scientist. That might be really vague. Put something a little more specific, like the type of scientist you are, or perhaps what you're standing for, if you're advocating for mental health, if you're advocating for a certain group, that kind of thing. If you have credentials, definitely use them. If you are a woman or a person of color or any other kind of visible minority, we definitely get a different response online. So if you have credentials, that will help quite a bit in kind of solidifying that. Be specific in your expertise. Don't write scientists. That's like so vague. We all know there's like many types of scientists. You don't want to be so specific that it's like you and 30 other people in the world, but something that kind of narrows it down a little bit more so people understand the kind of scientist you are and what you do. Next is your affiliations. You can add your university or add your location. This is really just a way for you to kind of like find your tribe and other people to like have something to relate to you with. And by doing so, you can kind of expand that reach a little bit more. And then just for protection, if you are like a doctor, for example, you want to have some disclaimers, like this is not medical advice. If you're studying mental illness, add that this is not, you know, official advice. If you're working for a specific institution, you want to add some protection, like views are my own, or retweet does not equal endorsement, something like that. And then last, you want to add a little bit of your personality. So it doesn't just look like you took this list, filled in the information, and just like threw it out there. There needs to be something that's like a little bit more you, a little bit more just something personable for you specifically. I can't tell you what that is because only you know what that is. So this is an example of one of my favorite ones. This is Fascinated by Fungi. He's a PhD student over at UC Davis, my alma mater. Within one instant of just like looking at his page, you instantly know that he is studying fungi, and that he has a bunch of fungi. So if you're interested in mushrooms, learning more about them, getting photos of cool mushrooms, you can easily figure that out really quickly. There's also branding just within like video thumbnails. This is Seeker, a really large media company that produces science videos. This one is a little more subtle because they have a lot more like resources and abilities and whatnot. But they also have the subtlety of it is like kind of like if you look at all the purples in this image, for example, every purple is the exact same hue. Every font is the exact same font. The layout of every single one is exactly the same. These kinds of subtle things are all like built together. So that way, when you put it all together, it forms this nice cohesive aesthetic. Which brings me to the personal website. I strongly encourage everyone to have a personal website. I know it may seem like a lot of work, but it is so useful. You can control your branding. It's a place to put all your portfolio. It's a great way to like just have that website name at the top of like your resume, your CV, that kind of thing. And it points recruiters in the right direction. So it's also really great for people who are trying to contact you. For example, if someone finds your work, they think it's really cool. And on Twitter, there's a place to put your website. This would be a great place to go. So next question becomes, what host should you use? For starting out, I really recommend Google Sites. It's free, it's easy, there's templates, it's super simple. If you have a little bit of budget to work with, I recommend using Squarespace. You can create things like this that have many, many features. There is a subscription fee, but it is really easy to use and easy to pick up. Lastly is, what is the essential information that actually should live on this personal website? So I suggest having a photo. It can be either like a headshot or something that's a little more creative, something that captures like who you are. Next is some sort of personal summary. Try not to make it like very official resume speak. You just want to get people excited about what excites you. And for science specifically, it's really useful to have a broad kind of overview of your research interests and your work. You might have like a link to all your publications. You might have a link to your lab website. You might have a link to a paper that you've published. The idea is just to have all of that information kind of in one spot. And so then you can also put links to your social media, like your LinkedIn, your Twitter, all those like professional things as well. And then, like I said before, having contact information. You want to be able to tell people where they can reach you, whether that's through the website directly, through an email, through Twitter, etc. Ultimately, the point of having a website is for people to be able to look at it, understand who you are, and maybe have a way of contacting you. So this next one is going to be kind of dense, so get ready to take some notes. Twitter. So strategy for Twitter. This is my good friend, Susanna Harris. She is super awesome if you ever have had a chance to meet her. She talks about mental health for graduate students, mainly to an audience of academics. So as we all know, science Twitter is enormous. Science Twitter is huge. So as a result, she put a lot of time and effort into being on Twitter, figuring out how it works, figuring out her analytics, figuring out which of her tweets do really well, etc. And as a result, was able to kind of focus all of her effort on this platform of picking Twitter. And I want to give you guys some Twitter tips in no particular order. For Twitter especially, time is everything. Please use the schedule function. It is very important. You can tweet something at 2 a.m., but how many people are going to see it before it just disappears into the internet like nebulous nothingness? Use the schedule function. Twitter treats scheduled tweets exactly the same way as a real tweet does, which is in contrast to some of the other platforms. For example, if you have a drafted post in Instagram and then you post the draft, Instagram does not like that. It thinks that this is like not worthy of as much attention in the algorithm. But on Twitter, scheduled things work exactly the same way. On Twitter as well, for every 1,000-ish followers, about 50% of them are going to be your peers and 50% are others. This is really kind of big, especially in like the beginning stages, because a lot of times you'll be networking and a lot of people that'll be following you are other scientists, people in your program, etc. So if you're trying to reach an audience of people who are other scientists, that's working great. If you're trying to reach an audience of mostly outside, that's maybe you have to start switching hashtags, switching who you're tagging, etc. Just think about kind of like who exactly you're reaching and who your ideal audience is, because those are two separate things. As well as retweets. So retweets are better than likes. If you have the chance to like see someone's work and you have some opinion on it, retweet it with a comment rather than commenting on it, because then it'll actually pop up in your feed, pops up in the algorithm. It just kind of works a little bit better. If you're liking things just to like things, just because you're like scrolling, like that's totally fine. But if you're trying to like actively be like, okay, I'm improving my social media right now, try and do a retweet with some sort of thing to contribute to the conversation. The half-life of something on Twitter is approximately 15 to 25 minutes, depending on who you are on Twitter, really. But that means that when someone replies to you on Twitter, you want to be careful of like when exactly you respond. So to maximize that like half-life, so to speak, if you wait like 20 minutes to respond and then respond to them, then that tweet will like show up again a second time in the timeline. And so as a result, you don't show up just once for that half-life, you get two of those, if that makes sense. So for Instagram, that works a little bit differently. You want to try and respond to things as quickly as possible. For Facebook as well, as fast as possible. YouTube doesn't really care either way. But Twitter specifically, you want to try and pace out, like, you know, when you're responding to people's comments, so that way that tweet resurfaces in people's timelines. And overall on Twitter, you want to be direct and post a lot because it does require a lot of content, but you don't want to overwhelm. Unless you are like live tweeting something or you are an orange president, then there's no need to tweet out like every single second of your life. Okay, ultimately, this is all about creating content that works. So there's 3 key things that really matter here, which is optimizing, being unique, and engaging. So when I say optimize, what I mean is you want to try and establish and maintain a consistent level of communication. Are you committing to like spending a couple hours every day, or are you only able to do it like maybe once a week? It has to be consistent no matter whatever it is that you pick. So optimizing will help you kind of achieve that consistency by optimizing like your workflow and how exactly you're creating content. So for example, if you are creating, say, science art, no matter what it is that you're creating, you want to try and create more than one type of content of it. People love to see the process, the behind the scenes, what you're thinking about, what you're going through. So if you're creating science art, you have that piece of content that is your science art, but you also have perhaps you can make a video of how it was being made. You can make a voiceover explaining what exactly is the science art. And as a result, you can kind of almost repurpose the content and have like multiple types of that same content in different forms, and thus be able to post more often or perhaps more consistently. Also redefining, especially at the beginning, success is just about like posting and posting consistently. It's not about how many likes you get, because that just really varies on the number of people that are active, the number of followers you have, the way that the algorithm is changes. It's just, there's so many things. So just celebrate every win, focus on, did you manage to hit that goal of posting consistently? And that is good. I'll talk a little bit about hashtag optimization on the next slide. Next thing is really being unique. I think sometimes there's this feeling of being in competition, or that like, oh, there's already these people who are so big, like I don't have time. I'm not like going to be good enough. But like the nice thing about being online is that there's literally infinite space at this digital table. Like everyone can sit there. The only thing is that you have to be original. There are so many people who are posting about science online, and you need to be original, because otherwise there's no reason for someone to follow you as opposed to someone else who's doing the exact same thing. So find what makes you special and resonates with your community, and then do it. For most of us, that just means kind of leaning into your personality, because we as people are all going to be unique inherently. But it also might be like taking a unique spin on things, perhaps having a different way of phrasing things, a different way of illustrating things, and that kind of thing. With science too, that also means bringing in your area of expertise. You want to have this balance between your educator side, your human side. You might represent like certain groups. That's another way that you can try and bring in that uniqueness. Speaking on certain groups though, you want to try and also follow and listen to people from other groups. I'll get to more of that also in a second. But it really just means engaging in the part of you that wants to do this, thinking of the pros, the reasons that you want to be in social media. So to stay unique, you got to keep that creativity high, keep the confidence up. That might mean like improving your headspace, having like a comfortable physical workspace, taking deep breaths, creative exploration. You want to have like this constant source of inspiration. Perhaps you're following, Instagram pages of just like really beautiful science photos. Perhaps you're watching nature documentaries. Perhaps you are cultivating Twitter lists, for example. Twitter lists are a really great way of kind of filtering out your feed. You can create a list that includes all the people who you really are inspired by or look up to. And then when you're looking at that list specifically, it's a way to kind of generate more ideas and think about, what is it in this post that makes me feel great? And how can I do that in something of one of my posts, taking my own spin on that? And then last thing, but definitely not least, is engage. You want to make your content engaging. This means making it like relevant to people's lives, relevant to the time, inviting them to join in like conversations, discussions, that type of thing. But it also means engaging with your community, not just making your content engaging. One thing that I see a lot is that people with smaller followings are sometimes just ignored, or their content is just not being valued until they get to a higher follower number. Don't do this. It's literally just elitist, it's rude, and you want to be approachable and sincere and just like a nice person. So if someone is reaching out or tagging you and stuff, don't just like dismiss it because they have, like 4 followers or whatever. Think about like, is this legitimately like content that I'm interested in? Is it relevant, etc.? And base it on that. And then you also want to be able to like reach out to people instead of waiting for them to reach out to you. DM, other scientists, creators, communicators. The worst thing that's happened is like they'll just not respond. It's no big deal. So content varies widely. Let's look at this paper for an example. This tweet, for example. So a paper is really scientifically dense. You want it to hit not just like a scientific audience, but a very specific scientific audience. you want to try and kind of narrow that down. So 3 points here. First, it's her first paper as a grad student. That excitement feeling is very relatable to a lot of us as scientists, and the use of like the siren emojis just kind of like adds to that. Secondly, she tags people as well as hashtags, and I want to focus in on her hashtags real quick here, which is that she doesn't use hashtags like science, research, etc. She uses hashtags that are specific to her paper and specific to her research. And that is incredibly useful because then she's able to reach people who are following those specific things. And then lastly, reasons to read is a really great hook. A lot of times on Twitter, people will just like post a link to a paper and like leave it at that and like maybe like one sentence, but that's not good enough. We all know papers are a lot. They're a lot to read. Everyone has like that stack of like 100 papers that they say they'll read and like haven't gotten to. But how can you convince your audience that there's a reason to read this paper? So for hashtags overall, I really recommend creating kind of like this cultivated list of hashtags, maybe 4 to 5 groups of them, and then rotating between them. This is because some hashtags can be shadow banned, which means that they might be banned from viewing. For example, some hashtags relating to stem cells have been banned due to the controversial nature of them. So think about which hashtags you are using, make sure they're not shadow banned, and then just kind of make sure you're cultivating through that. You want to have this like internal list of like stuff that's reaching your internal audience, and those are the hashtags you can continually come back to. Finding images can be kind of complicated, especially if you are a person who works in like data science or computer science. But this is my friend Samantha, who has done a really amazing job of that. She's a data scientist that looks at air-sea physics interactions, and you can see that she's made her page incredibly visually appealing because she has photos not just of her sitting at her desk coding, but it's also, you know, the actual sea itself, looking at different whiteboards, what her algorithm is, etc. So when you're thinking about images, go back to that, like, you know, branding design. Think about the adjectives that you want people to think of. Do you want it to be more infographics? Do you want it to be personal? If you want it to be personal, like casual photos are better. And so using that kind of branding design to design what kind of images are going to be on your online presence. For video content, I'm going to focus in on YouTube because it is the largest platform. It's been around for super long. It remains the largest platform despite many other ones existing. And it also has a really huge audience of people who are interested in education and science. And so we know a lot of these people who are making science videos. You might recognize some of these people. There's Bill Nye the Science Guy, Simon Geertz, the girl who builds bad robots, kind of like her tagline, ASAP Science, etc. And if you look at this, you might notice one thing, which is that they are all white. Representation in science media, just like representation in general, has largely just been really white. This is just a problem in media overall. But I want you guys to think about racism as not just a lens, but also an action. It's not like a binary. You're not like either racist or not. We're all in this like spectrum of bias. So you might not want to like hurt someone, but you might be doing damage in a different way. So one of the biggest things I notice is looking at who are you following? Are you giving the same level of follows to like male and female, for example? Are you following Black creators, Indigenous creators, etc.? Do you give the same attention to BIPOC people on the internet? One of the biggest things that BIPOC constantly talk about is that it takes so much more effort, content, quality, etc., to reach the same metrics as some of the white peers that we have. So that's why I really say do not be discouraged by metrics, especially if you fall into one of these groups, because remember, just redefine success, especially for that like first couple people. It's just the act of doing it. And racism on the internet is sometimes, you know, worse because it's behind a screen. So the solution to this bias is not just one thing. We have to come at it from all angles. But I really encourage you to kind of follow creators, follow these other accounts that can challenge your view. Luckily, there's people who are kind of working to dismantle the stereotype, so to speak. This is the Pass It Off challenge that was used, highlighting Latinas in STEM and also people from HBCUs. If we look at Corey, she is a person who is a scientist and a Black female. Her entire kind of Instagram and online presence is devoted to this. You can see very first in her byline, the first thing she says is diversity in STEM. So as a result, she has lots of imagery, photos of herself. So using Instagram as an image-based platform makes a lot of sense. There's also a lot of organizations that work for representation in science. I really encourage you to check these ones out. They're some of my favorites. All of them have like links to people who identify that way. So perhaps look at them, see if there's someone who's in your field, someone whose work you resonate with, etc. Just see what's out there. And then this would not be a social media talk if I did not talk about the haters, so to speak. There's different types of haters. I kind of put them into 2 categories of people who are like in science and universities and that kind of hate. Then there's the online haters. Online haters, it's kind of easier to ignore because at the end of the day, they are commenting, they're liking, they're doing whatever to your post that ultimately is resulting in more engagement. You might get people talking about you being a woman, and therefore it doesn't matter what you have to say and that kind of thing. That's obviously nonsense, but the fact that they've commented means the algorithm likes your post even more. So just think of it from a point of kind of that positivity. The hate, so to speak, from scientists and universities is a little more complicated because it's coming from people who, can be really educated and are in groups that we are also in. But, some scientists are worried about overselling the relevance of certain results or oversimplifying results, or maybe they're uncomfortable with self-promotion, or they're afraid that you're not going to be objective. There's this attitude of like, I didn't need to do this, so why are you wasting your time? Or they just don't see like the benefits and purpose, because sometimes the benefits and purpose of social media can be kind of nebulous and not as easily quantifiable. So I personally, in some of my stuff, have definitely gotten comments about my race, my skin tone, etc. Recently, someone went on my website and told me that this photo of myself in a button-up and glasses was provocative, and that was just so incorrect. It's just her own bias coming in and talking about this. And marginalized groups are especially targeted. Would I have gotten the same comment were I a white person? Most likely not. There was also a study that kind of resurfaced this summer looking at, it was a study published last year looking at the behavior of people on social media who are also scientists. And the study was just full of misogyny and sexism, etc. And it was published in a well-known journal. The paper has since been removed, but it was thanks to the actions of people like Corey, posting photos and being brave enough to show, hey, just because I'm dressed differently or just because I'm on social media doesn't mean my science is somehow invalid in this way. So anyway, that's a bit on the haters. Now for the real feedback, not the hater feedback. The last step in the cycle is feedback. There's, the apps will directly give you insights themselves. On the top, you have Instagram. For example, if you're trying to reach largely females, Instagram will tell you, hey, you're reaching largely females or largely males, etc. You can adjust your content accordingly. It'll also tell you when your followers are most active, which is really great because then you want to try and, post when your followers are going to be able to see it. So you can use this to inform when you're going to be talking about things. On the bottom, you can also see some YouTube analytics. It marks when you post a video, how does the number of interactions respond? But in addition to these hard metrics, there's also kind of these soft metrics that I like to use. For example, you can use Instagram polls. You can ask people questions like, hey, did you know this? Yes or no? Hey, what do you think of these 3 choices? Or having weird facts and that kind of thing. Because those are polls that are a little more interesting, so people will want to respond. And just the data of how many people respond to the poll in and of itself, that is a data point and is really useful, because then you can know how many people are even interested in whatever it is that you are polling and checking out there. So for example, after I chatted with some undergrads last month, the organizer of that talk polled them and then gave me the results. So this was a really good look into understanding which of the things that I said really resonated with them and which of the things they were not including in this talk here. So that's all a lot of stuff, but TLDR real quick, it's all about your community. You want to try and be real, be relatable, be inspirational, ideally be all of those things. Remember that communication goes both ways. You want to start a conversation and then engage in that conversation by listening and learning. Craft content for your ideal audience. Like I said, in the start, audience is mostly your peers, so make sure you're creating content for your ideal audience itself. And finally, I would really like to take a photo with you guys. I know we're not there in person, but perhaps this can be our Zoom era photo. So I guess take a second to adjust yourself, turn on your camera if you're comfortable turning on your camera. Oops.
Niba,
yeah.
Before we do that, I failed and lost the Jamboards link that I was supposed to send out. Can you help me out?
All good. Here is the link. Here we go. The link is just tinyurl.com/Niba201105.
Okay, I'm gonna copy it. Sorry about that. I, of course, copied something else afterwards, and when I went to paste it, that didn't work out very well.
All good. It seems that people are posting questions here in the chat, so
that was my other.
That's great. Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
right, excellent. So real quick, we can just grab a photo because I'd love to see your smiling faces. Jill, do you mind going ahead and just grabbing a quick screenshot and counting us down? Oh, I think you're muted.
Hold on one sec. Let me make sure I get this right. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Got it.
Great, great. And then I'll grab one without my screen share so that we can actually get like a nice grid of everybody. Because I realized that that probably only includes like a couple handful of people. All right.
Correct, correct. Everyone want to turn your cameras on if you can? Oh, Catherine, you're flashing green on and off. Are you having? Oh, okay.
Am I still flashing?
No, you're good now. So, Chris Avery, are you able to put your camera on?
No pressure in turning your camera on. It's 100% just whatever you're comfortable with.
It should be on, but it's on.
Okay, however you want to proceed, Niba.
Okay. Do you mind grabbing the screenshot? I can't get the grid view.
Oh, sure.
And if you could just count us down real quick.
Sure, give me 2 seconds. All right, 3, 2, 1. Got it.
Right. Awesome. And then let me just grab this one more time. Great. And then I guess last thing, some shameless self-promotion. If you want to have any questions that after you come up with after the talk, feel free to follow me on social media, ask me any questions there. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's like my personal project, just exploring the science and beauty and fashion and skincare. And just thank you all so much for coming. I know it's been a heck of a week. It's been a heck of a year. So thank you so much. Your just presence here is really valued. So feel free to start messaging things on the Jamboard. I'll be taking questions now. I'll start off with questions that are in the chat just so that you guys can get those right away. If I pronounce anyone's names incorrectly, I apologize. Feel free to like unmute yourself and just chime in. So first one is to increase the half-life of a tweet, would it be appropriate to exceed the 12 minutes limits to avoid being lost in the nebulous? It depends on how you are increasing the half-life, so to speak. So one of the ways of increasing that half-life, so to speak, is like, commenting back on that. So that way it goes into the feed. If you comment back, after like longer than 20 minutes, that's fine. It just won't reappear in the feed for quite as long. But that being said, that is how the algorithm is currently structured. And every algorithm goes through like multiple changes multiple times a year. So this may not even be relevant like a week from now. How do we determine the best time to post on each platform? The best time is really dependent on who you are trying to reach. So for example, a lot of people, first thing they do in the morning is like, they'll wake up, grab their phone, kind of scroll for a little bit. But that type of scrolling, that kind of like casual laying in bed, whatever type scrolling is very different from people who might be actively engaging with the social media and are using it to like share papers and share research, etc. So figure out like what exactly it is that you're sharing and who you're sharing it to. So if you are sharing something that's like a little more fun, lighthearted, casual, you might want to do something that's a little more in the evenings. If you're doing something that's a little more heavier, a little more serious, you might want to do that a little bit more in the mornings, perhaps like 9, 8 a.m. So that way it's in people's feeds when they wake up. I recommend trying to kind of stay away from any kind of like science topic or anything heavy on the weekends. Even for creators that are creating things like beauty and science, skincare and that kind of thing, we try and stay away from weekends because people have lives outside of the internet. And the only reason really to post on weekends is if you have like an event happened or it's happening soon, or if you're just trying to stay on that algorithm. Instagram really likes it if you post like every single day. And if you're capable of doing that, of posting every day, then yeah, go for it. If you spread out your responses, it'll increase chances of tweet being viewed. That is correct. How do you assess the metrics on posts on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram? Each of these platforms let you kind of access the metrics on their own way. So in Twitter, there's at the bottom of every single tweet that you make, there's like options of like comment and share and etc. And then it'll have like a little like polling icon, and that's how you can like check those metrics. I encourage you to check the metrics of multiple tweets. Don't just check the metrics of like your top performing tweet, because if you can look at like the bottom one and the top one, it gives you like this nice like minimum to maximum understanding of what your reach is. And then same for LinkedIn. For Instagram, you have to have a creator or a business account in order to access those metrics. So just switch your account over to one of those two things and you'll be able to assess them usually. A lot of scientists tend to go into the creator account, but if you're someone who's posting a lot more like, I guess, heavier science type stuff, you might want to be a business. As far as I know, Instagram does not treat those two account types differently. It's just a matter of like business account has options for like shopping and whatnot. So if you're creating like science stickers and that kind of thing, you definitely want to be a business account so that they can like link to your shop and like purchase directly through Instagram. How do you handle negative criticism on social media? For example, you make an academic post and a few caustic remarks were made by readers. Would silence be a good approach? It depends. Part of it is personal, but in my opinion, it really depends on that negative criticism. You don't want to disregard criticism just because it's negative. You know, like maybe they do make a valid point, and being able to show that you respond well to negativity is really important. There are some people on the internet who, when they have criticism, they just block that person. And within the science communication community, we all know who that is. None of us really enjoy that, you know, like if you're saying something that's a valid criticism and someone just blocks you, then that's not really the move, you know. But at the same time, if it is like valid criticism, you want to think about it, you know, if it is something that you genuinely can improve on, if it's something that perhaps you did an experiment differently, you can be like, oh, that's a good point, I'll think about that future. But if it's negative criticism that like doesn't add anything, you know, like I'll get people being like, scrub your skin, and I'm like, thanks for the engagement, dude. Sometimes people can, you know, feel sassy and just be like, thanks for the engagement. Or you can just be silent. It doesn't really matter. It really just depends on like what that criticism is. I get a question on what about sharing across platforms, like sharing a TikTok to Instagram and Twitter, but not posting other content on those platforms. I guess I'm a little confused. Do you mean like only cross-pollinating the content that you've created on TikTok like to Instagram, so your Instagram feed is just TikToks?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking, because I've just recently got TikTok and I am obsessed with it. But I also like Instagram and Twitter, but it's like that would be a lot to keep up with. And I know I definitely like doing the short videos, and I have, you know, I don't have a decent following. I have like 500 followers on the other two, but like I know that some people don't really like that, to see like TikTok on Instagram. But I was wondering, is that like taboo or something? Like how?
It's not. Things have changed drastically online since Instagram has decided to become this like weird Frankenstein monster of like, here's reels and here's shopping and here's IGTV and here's stories. They're just like absorbing everything that other people are doing. People have generally just been accepting of like, you can post your TikToks to Instagram, like no big deal. Every single creator who existed on TikTok and exists on Instagram is doing that. That's totally fine. For Twitter, I think it would just depend on what else is in your Twitter and who is engaging in your Twitter. If you're creating content that is valid for that audience, then absolutely go for it. There's a person, Jada Elcox, who makes scientific Twitters. I'll find her link later. And scientific TikTok, sorry. And she posts them all to Twitter. And part of the reason her Twitter got so much following is because people on science Twitter were like, oh my gosh, these TikToks are great. I didn't realize that TikTok could be like edu-talk. And so that just went like super well. So I would think about kind of like, is it valid for those audiences? And if it is, then absolutely go for it, especially go for it on Instagram. Like that is not at all a faux pas. I would consider it a little bit more for the other platforms. But I would also encourage you to look at like Instagram Reels. I know that the editing on Reels is painful. I never use Instagram Reels editing. It's so bad right now. But like, I mean, a lot of people create videos using like iPhone or whatever phone you have editing apps and then upload the video. So if you can, you know, post a video to Reels, the algorithm will love that so much more. Instagram loves it when people use their new features. So anytime there's a new feature on any platform ever, try and use it as much as you can because it will just love that. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. Do you suggest accepting LinkedIn requests from people who may be in a tangential field, but with whom you've never communicated or connected? LinkedIn connections feel more personal than follows. Yeah, certainly they are. I think this question just depends on who you respond and who like is being asked the question, really. There are definitely people who accept every single LinkedIn invitation ever. There are other people who feel like they want it to be people that we've communicated online or we've communicated in person, or at least I've talked to you, right? For me personally, that is what I have done. I've gotten a lot of comments and weird things through my Instagram and LinkedIn connection to the point where I'm like, if I've never spoken to you, I'm not going to accept a connection from you. But sometimes, some people have recruiting as part of their job. So that's like required as part of their job. I would suggest first just start out with like, send a LinkedIn request to everyone that you know. For example, everyone in this webinar, Jill, honestly, as well. Anytime I work with somebody, anytime I get an email from someone, anytime I like continue communication with someone, I send them a LinkedIn connection. You don't need it to be like as personal as like a private Facebook, like Facebook friend request. It's certainly not that personal, but like for me personally, I think having at least like one communication is really helpful. So yeah, great. So migrating onwards, it seems like a lot of you guys are interested in Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. That's great to see. I really love a good LinkedIn profile. It's been so helpful. One thing that I'll suggest for LinkedIn is make sure that your banner photo is something that's really interesting. Feel free to give me like a LinkedIn invitation after this if you would like. And you can see on my banner, I have a photo of climate change and the way that the years have, slowly risen in color. And then in my about section, I have a little blurb that explains climate change. And so many people have messaged me being like, wow, that was like really cool. I love that it connected. And I love that you're a science communicator. So it all makes sense. So just try and have something that kind of like connects it in that way, is my one other additional point on that.
A question regarding this one. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So can you post an image? Like, is there any copyright, something like that, for the on the LinkedIn?
I don't believe so, but if you're posting something that is like someone else's work, that's not really ideal. I would really suggest try to find something that either exists in like public domain, like the image I suggested, or something that comes from your work. So for example, if you do a lot of microscopy, just grab like a couple microscope images that look cool, put them together in like one photo, have like 3 or 4 like, lined up together, and then use that as your cover.
Thank you.
Let's see. All right, a couple questions. I'm glad you guys all can access the Jamboard now. I was like, wow, why is no one using this? Okay, great. I'm glad you guys figured that out. What are my thoughts on creating separate business Instagrams? I guess it depends on what the separation is. Can whoever wrote that clarify a second?
Yeah, I was thinking about creating a separate business Instagram so that I could just have my own business, my own personal Instagram for like my fashion and my family. So I want to have like a counselor educator business Instagram where I also include tips for counselors as well as for clients. So
yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Honestly, I would 100% do that. 100% separate them. To use like the slang, it's kind of like having a Finsta. So your Finsta would be like everything for personal, like friends, family. It's short for fake Insta, but it's kind of evolved in term. For a lot of psychomers, they do separate the two out, and I think especially as your online presence evolves and grows online, it's nice to keep those separate, especially because like maybe you want to share something that's not really relevant to your audience that's interested in clinical and psychological and just like counseling things in general, but you do want to share it to people that are important to you in your life. So absolutely, 100%. These are two different audiences, two different things. Yeah. So another question was, how do you get to people outside of your science bubble? Oh, this is so great. I'm glad you asked this because this is something I wanted to mention. I highly recommend trying to look at the people outside of your science bubble, that ideal audience. If you can find someone who is in that ideal audience and look at the kind of things that they follow, look at the hashtags that they follow, look at the people that they follow, try and get like a sampling of those types of people. Because you don't want to be like tagging things that are irrelevant. You don't want to be hashtagging things that are irrelevant, especially for Instagram. To get to people outside of that bubble, you need to be hashtagging things that are not just within science. There's a lot of tendency to do like hashtag like women in STEM or like hashtag STEM or whatever. But those are inevitably going to reach people who are interested in those concepts, interested in STEM already. So if you're trying to reach people who are outside of that, it's going to be a bit different. One question about YouTube. How do you work with the algorithm, especially with ads and suggested videos to viewers that you don't want associated with you? This is like a question more for like, I guess like once you're monetized and once you have ads and once all of those are in play. Typically, I believe you can like choose those types of ads and you can choose what kinds of ads your viewers will get. But it really depends on like where you're at in your YouTube. Like, are you monetized yet? Are you at like 10,000 people? Are you at like some significant number? And it's pretty much known that like generally the ads and suggested videos that are given afterwards are not associated with you. They might be like falling in there just because the person who's watching falls into that category, but I wouldn't worry about like what exactly that reflection is on you because they're not very much linked. One of the questions on LinkedIn, how do you balance the content to post? Most people expect the content to be a bit formal. Certainly, LinkedIn is a professional site. Most of it tends to be pretty professional, but it doesn't necessarily mean everything has to be professional. Susanna had a really awesome post the other month or two ago on LinkedIn talking about the benefits of mental health, remembering to stay careful, stay confident. LinkedIn also has a lot of what is commonly known as like toxic positivity, where people are just like hustle culture, go get it, like work hard all the time. And I'm just like, sleep sometimes, like that's cool too. So it's a balance based on where you want your balance to be. Do you want to be presented as this like, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a go-getter, I'm a hustler, I can do this, and that is totally valid. You know, like if you want to be that way, do that. But if you want to be a little more casual with it or talk about other issues, definitely discuss it there. I would recommend against putting things that are really personal or things that are really related to your story on LinkedIn, just because it doesn't perform well and it's not the purpose of the connection. And like people aren't on LinkedIn to usually do that. If it's something that's relevant, then that's totally working. For example, Corey recently posted her like video of HBCUs and people who had gone to HBCUs and the doctors that they became, and then talked about her journey in that space, in that professional space, in relation to her personal story. So for LinkedIn, just make sure like whatever you're posting in some way, shape, or form relates to your work, your professionalism, etc. I am very excited to see all of these questions. I see a lot of empty slides. Okay, awesome. Are there any other questions that I missed? I tried to hit all of them.
I have a question. I'm not sure if you have any more in the Jamboard. Well, yeah, I guess a question slash comment. So you did a really good job of pointing out that generally social media is full of, white people and white males. But one thing that I think you didn't touch on was that a lot of them are also very attractive. And so, especially in the science field, when that might not be something that you're particularly focused on, what other skills that you can suggest to help develop more attractive pages where you might not be the person who, the focus of that page?
Yeah, certainly. Certainly. Thank you so much for pointing that out. That is a really good point. Attractiveness has been a huge thing because historically posts that are posted with a face tend to do really better. And if you're telling a story and you're being relatable, people like to see kind of the face behind that. One really great way I've seen a lot of people kind of not just if you're not attractive, but if you just choose to not share your face, you know, like you deciding your own worth based on attractiveness is nonsense. Like if you want to post your face, post your face. If you don't have to. It's irrelevant of how you look and how others might perceive you. But if you choose to not post your own face, there are other ways of doing that, primarily through a visual means if you're doing it visually. One of the big things on YouTube has been through animations. People will animate like cartoon versions of themselves and then have that version talk to the people, and that has like blown up really successfully. Another way is through illustrations, especially with scientific art, scientific illustrations. Some people like the Pen and the Pangolin, they started off just doing scientific illustrations, posting photos of like, here's a flower drawn in a scientific way. So there are other ways to visually present yourself other than just through your face. And certainly it is definitely like, you know, a huge part of the algorithm, a huge part of social media, but there should be zero pressure to feel like you have to post your face in order to be relevant, because there are other ways of doing so. And you are 100% valid in choosing that decision for yourself.
Thanks. Jumping off of that, so some skills that you might have developed, do you use like Photoshop, Illustrator, any of like Inkspace, InDesign? You spoke about animation, so any of those kinds of platforms to create your content?
Yeah, I use every single one of those actually. I use the entire Adobe. I'm gonna close this real quick. The entire Adobe Creative Suite. If One thing I suggest, since many of you may be at a university already, most universities will let you access these kinds of technologies either for free or for discounts. So grab a hold of that while you still can. Some universities just give you the Creative Suite, and that's like $50 a month. They've changed it to like the subscription-based thing. It's so expensive. But expense shouldn't be what stops you. There are a lot of like free editing apps for your iPhone. There's free apps for doing it just like off your phone. Whether that's for illustration or for photos or etc. A lot of these things have just been made accessible. One thing that I really enjoy for like quick graphic creation is Canva, canva.com. That one's really awesome. I've even seen it listed as a skill in a job description. People were like, "Do you know how to use Canva?" And it's the most simple. It's like drag and drop, like PixArt, and they have like templates and that kind of thing for you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Are there any other questions?
I'll pose a question if no one else has one at the moment. So we have this group of STEM researchers here who are forging various careers for themselves. How important is it, and how much time should they be devoting to creating compelling social media platforms and the personal website? Is this a must-have for scientists today? Is it a nice to have? Where would you put it?
Yeah, I'm certainly biased. I don't think in any realm it is required. You know, at the end of the day, you are a scientist. What is required of you is your science, and pretty much that's it. I do think, especially as the world gets more and more technologically inclined and more social media focused, that this, especially like having like a simple personal website, spending like 5 hours on it and then not touching it for like a year or two is perfectly fine. The amount of time that you choose to put on social media is a personal choice. These benefits that you get, you know, whether that's jobs, invitations, getting invited to speak at things, for example, they're not as like concrete and quantitative as we might be used to coming from like a scientific background. So based on that, it's kind of your own interest. You know, do you genuinely enjoy making content? If it's something that you don't enjoy doing, then why do it? Like, life is short. Don't do stuff you don't want to do. But if you like doing it and you're having fun, you know, like creating art, making science comedy, making like science TikToks, then I 100% encourage you to do that. As for the amount of time, I don't know if there's really like a set amount of time. I'm sure we all know like there's weeks where you're just like drowning in your thesis, and then there's weeks where you're just like waiting for an experiment to run because the step says wait 12 hours for enzyme to process or whatever. I don't know. So it's going to fluctuate. I think what's most important is trying to just keep that consistent. So one really important thing is to try and like batch create stuff. So for example, if you are filming a TikTok video, say for example, you get out all your filming equipment, you set up your like phone, you like record it. If you can try and like batch create, like, you know, create 3 videos on one day, edit them all on day 2, and then post them 1, 2, 3, etc. That'll reduce the time that you have to do, and that way it'll make it easier for, you know, on the week that you have your committee meeting, you can still continue to post even though you have your committee meeting going on, because you've got this like, you know, backup like evergreen content ready to just post whenever you're ready to post it.
That's a great point. And I also love your point that everyone here should be connecting with me on LinkedIn, because I think I've encouraged students to do that as well, and to with each other, because that's a pretty quick thing you can do, and getting your LinkedIn up to speed isn't that burdensome or that difficult. And in fact, we run workshops every semester on creating a compelling LinkedIn profile. So you can just kind of do the basics, get a great photo up there, and then use that to network with people. So I appreciate that comment too.
Yeah, I really encourage you to take advantage of that like free photo headshot, because there's so many times like afterwards where you'll be like invited for talks, or you have to like provide an icon for a website, and you want to have like at least there's one nice iconic image, just that like across platforms. So that way, like whether someone is seeing you on Twitter or they're seeing you on LinkedIn, you have the same icon and they can recognize it visually.
Yes. Anyone else have questions for Niba? We have about 5 minutes.
I have another. Oh, I heard somebody else going.
Well, I think it's you.
Okay. So with LinkedIn, definitely, Niba, you had mentioned how it's a professional platform, but LinkedIn also seems to be sort of like a very, I guess the word is entrenched platform. So do you have any suggestions of more non-traditional places to connect with, being sort of more?
Sorry, I can't hear you. You cut out after non-traditional.
I'm sorry, somehow my computer cut out. But yeah, do you have examples, or do you know of examples of like, one of them I think was Black women PhDs. So stuff like that where you can reach out to people where it's not that same culture, because sometimes as a scientist, especially if you're interdisciplinary, you're looking for more open spaces, more like and how you mentioned with I think it was 500 queer scientists, that type of thing.
Yeah, certainly. I also recommend STEM Noir, NOIRE. They're also a group online. I also suggest there's a conference called Reclaiming STEM. I actually attended it this year. It was incredibly useful, and I altered a way that I introduced myself. It was so just informative. It's run by Evelyn Venice Ward, I believe, and it discusses like decolonizing STEM and kind of just having this open space, ways to talk about things, how to constructively, you know, take feedback, because it's impossible to be perfect all the time, etc. A lot of it is kind of shared by similar spaces, so I think you'll find that like as you join these spaces, a lot of them will amplify each other's voices, and you'll be connected to more things. I believe Reclaiming STEM is happening next year as well, and if you look at kind of like the pages of where people who are advocating for diversity in STEM, look at where they're being featured. So on Instagram, for example, you can go to someone's page and then look at tags, and you'll see who has tagged them in other photos. And so a lot of times when I look at these, you'll find places that are like, I don't know, like smaller groups that are just beginning, and they're tagging these people because they want them to get noticed. And as a result, you can kind of like, you know, see these things before they start to occur. And just, you know, just the idea is just like once you get into the network, it really amplifies and snowballs into itself. But it's just really dependent on like, you have to engage with the network, you know, DM them, you know, DM Black women PhDs, see what she has to say, see what she thinks about what are some other spaces that you can join.
Perfect. I just followed those two that you mentioned, so thanks.
Yeah. I have a question of what platforms would you recommend for content aimed at parents for science projects for their kids? I would suggest there's a couple different ones. There's definitely a huge amount on YouTube. There's a lot of people who are like parents that are YouTubers that like do science experiments with their kids. Emily from Emily's Wonder Lab, she also has like this huge TikTok portfolio of like these science projects you can do at home. She has two children as well. She actually filmed her entire Netflix series while she was pregnant, which was such a beautiful representation in that, which was really, really incredible. So I would suggest probably primarily TikTok, primarily YouTube, things that are more video based because kids like things that are a little more engaging. One thing that's I've found that's really popular is something called the Dad Lab, and it's just this guy who is not a scientist, but he was just like wanting to teach his two kids scientific topics. So he started just kind of like doing these experiments and filming them, and he grew enormously. And now he has like he does it full time. He has a book. He has done super well. So yeah.
Well, wonderful. I think we are about at time. I really want to thank you for coming and talking with us today, Niba, and thanks to all of you for joining. You gave us a lot to think about, and as you mentioned, maybe too much to process all at once. So, so Niba will be posting this on her YouTube channel, and after the whole STEM series is over, we'll also be posting it on the CGL YouTube channel. So thanks so much. Have a wonderful night, everyone, and keep learning and growing.